Welcome to the sewer district. In the lower levels of Scut City lies an area that only the brave or the desperate visit, full of monsters, hazards and good old-fashioned toxic waste. And I'm going to show you exactly how I painted it all. And the first thing to say is I printed these at 0.08 layer height. It doesn't bridge necessarily or do overhangs very well, but it does look amazing. And this is a matte filament. It just gets rid of all the layer line issues, and it means I feel like I can use washes and not worry too much. With 100 odd to do, I kept it really simple. I used primer paints because they're in bigger pots than normal paints, and these are all going to get covered in a second. I started off with white and I sprayed white streaks of primer on, and then the bottoms of them where there's water I sprayed more white, and I did a mottled effect on the other pipes. There's 3 different types of pipe bottoms: water, dry and dirt. I then used a lightened brown. I put white into a brown primer and sprayed that all over them as well. Now these are done with Mr. Colour lacquer primers and they do spray really nicely. The aim is to just get a little bit of paint on everything, and that's what I did. And now comes the fun bit, adding grunge. All I did was use up some old products. I didn't go and buy anything new for this. I'm using winter streaking grime, which is brownish colour, and dark streaking grime. The clue is what it says on the bottle. It's streaking grime. So you put it on, you dab it on, and while it's still wet, you use something like odorless thinners to drag it down. I absolutely flooded these with odorless thinners, and sometimes it didn't work. My browns ended up a little shiny in places, and I fixed that later. But overall, it created stunning streaks. Even if I say so myself, this was purely accidental. Sometimes the clear came down and it swept away the pigments and left little clear meandering channels down through the... Oh, it looked beautiful. Next up, the outside. Now I tried an oil wash, Starship Filth, on this, and it's a light oil wash. You can see it didn't really work on these weathered sides. The cracks haven't really shown, and I think that's because the layer lines, fine as they are, have wicked the wash away. It did work a bit better on these sci-fi sides. It's brought out the cubes, but it's still not great. Another miss is this glossiness on the dirt sections. Now, I may want them to be glossy with water, but I do that myself if I want that. I've got a water section. So I decided instead to go over the weathered outsides with this product that I had sitting on the shelf. 10 years, never been used. And I've thinned it again with odorless thinner so it's not so thick. It's earth. It's by OK Interactive. It's an earth enamel paint. It's got a little bit of grittiness to the texture. Not much, just a little bit. And it's a brown colour and it thins down OK. I just sploshed it on. And once I sploshed the first side, I turned them all back around the other way and sploshed the other side. Time to fix that glossy dirt. Now, one option would be to use pigments. You just need to seal them with a spray matte varnish at some point. But I decided to use more enamels because I got all these products sat there. And this one is Kirk's Earth. It's a matte enamel effect, so it's got a little bit of grittiness to it. And I also use my favourite wash. Yes, I have a favourite wash, and it's MIG Productions Neutral Wash, a nice mid-greige. I put them on and I used odorless thinners. I didn't splash it on like I did the sides, but I put them on, odorless thinners, and splushed them a little bit together. Now, why won't this go glossy? Well, it was the browns specifically that were going glossy. The MIG Productions I've used in the past, it's never dry glossy. The earth one is an effect and it comes out quite matte, and I've already used it on the side, so I know that product shouldn't be too glossy either. So I'm hoping the combination of them over the top will dry nice and matte. You can see on the final video whether I succeeded or not. If you fancy making your own sewer district for your tabletop or a diorama, then the models are available in my current Kickstarter, the Sewer District. And if you're watching this video when it first comes out, there'll be an early bird offering. So get over there now so you know when it goes live. Otherwise, well, it will always be available for late pledge, but I'm afraid the price will have gone up. So if you're interested in sewers, junk piles, rust, scrap spiders, scavengers, sewer cleaners, sewer rats, vents of cleaning droids. Whoa, a huge amount of models. Then go check out the Kickstarter Sewer District now. There's a link in the description. Time to paint the pipes with water in the bottom. And at first I was going to do this a dark sludgy colour, but then I thought no, malignant green. It's an army painter speed paint and it looks far more toxic and disgusting. And we do need these tunnels to look slightly hazardous to your health. I thinned it with speed paint medium. I don't want it to be too intense. You could go with a far stronger look if you didn't thin it. And then I painted it on over all of my water texture areas. I went up the side a little bit just so that it would look like maybe the water had gone up and down over time. Even toxic turgid water is glossy, and for that I'm using my favourite gloss varnish, Tamiya Clear. And with the bulk of the models painted, it was time to get onto the details. The grates and doors got a bit of brown, and then they got this crusted rust deposits. I've got light, medium and this dark reddish version. The light dried way too light. It was horrendous, to be honest. It was like a pale pastel peach. I wanted to keep some of the splotchiness, but to tone it all down and make it look darker. So I went over it with the streaking grime, which has a brown base, diluted and brushed over the top. I suspect I diluted it a bit too much because it didn't really seem to make much of a difference. So then I went over it with the Starship Filth because I had it out for doing the sides of the tunnels. That didn't really make a difference. So finally I went over it with the dark reddish crusted rust deposits, diluted with odourless thinners. And because I put it on slightly more thickly, that did seem to work. One final touch was a little bit of broadsword silver speed paint, army painter speed paint, on the cut through grates. Next up, scary monsters. You might think these don't look too scary, but if you were the size of a miniature, whew, you'd be terrified. To paint them, I started with speed paints, army painter speed paints and camo colour. I diluted it quite a lot with speed paint medium and put on a base coat and left it to dry. Very underwhelming. I used a peach-coloured Vallejo acrylic paint to add lightness. Now I used this in two areas, one around the mouth, because mouths are generally pinkier, and one on the ends of the tentacles so I could paint a different colour on them. I dry brushed a bluey green onto the tentacles before adding some spots to the back of the tips of the tentacles to give them a mottled effect. I tried fluorescent pink, but it dried a bit dark. So I went back to the sort of light peach and added a little bit of the fluorescent in, so I ended up with a pinkier colour. To tone it all down, I dry brushed it and the ridges on the tentacles with more of the peach colour. And this is to, when I put the next coat on, is to allow it to show. It's a purple speed paint, and if I put it over the top without something lighter underneath, it just really won't look right. Even sci-fi sewers have rats. These ones are a little different though. Not only do they have 6 eyes and 6 legs, they're giant. They'll be taller than your minis. As an aside, I printed the pale grey one in FDM and I'm really pleased how it came out. Only the rescue one works without support, but it still looks really good. You can tell it's not as detailed as the resin, especially around the eyes, but it's a great option. So I started with pink primer. This is for going under yellow, but it works really well for ears, eyes, tails and feet of space rats. The main body of the rat is brown, and I didn't do much with these other than pay careful attention around the ears and eye areas not to go over the pink, so a lot of quite delicate spraying for me. I picked out the eyes and teeth in white before doing a 3-step process for the fur. The first thing is a beigey brown dry brush, just a little bit lighter than the brown primer. I added some white to that and then went over everything again. You can also see I put a paler streak across the back of more white. I used Army Painter Pallid Bone speed paint over all the pink areas, except the ears. I left them as the pink, before going back to the fur with another speed paint dark wood to add a nice dark tone to it. The finishing touch was to add some Tamiya clear gloss red over the eyes. The last part of the sewers was a cleaning vehicle. This has a bag on the back and a giant scary fan at the front. You do not want to meet it coming towards you in a sewer. I printed it in yellow, and I did actually leave some of that yellow showing through. You'll see it in the final result, but it does get heavily dirtied down. And the first stage of that was to use some primers, whites, blacks, browns, as I was painting other things, to add some detail into it and to get rid of all that plasticky yellow look. But oops, I missed a bit. Look at that glaring yellow. So I put some rust grease or streaking grime or whatever it was I had over the top of it. I wasn't that fussed, and I smeared it all round everywhere because I wanted this to look a well-used grimy machine anyway. So I just carried on streaking it and smearing it out. I didn't thin it at all. I just used the unshaken bit at the top and went down to the bottom to get the sludge until I got the effect I was after. I used monochrome pen, then Tamiya clear red to put some lights on the back. And my sewers were done. But this district doesn't just have sewage, it also has scrap tunnels and junk piles. And I printed all of these in brown. I found it quite helpful to colour code my prints. It also starts as a great base colour. And I have to be honest, there's no priming video for these because I didn't prime them. I literally went straight from print to paint. And we're back to sploshing. Yes, that word again. I've used it more in this video than the rest of my life put together. But it's true. I used rust streaks, crusted rust deposits in light, medium and dark, and I put them all over. Now, I didn't use a lot of white spirit odourless thinners on this. I generally did them more full strength because I haven't primed. My only tips are to keep everything wet and blend it in sections like this, to go over it a little bit to blend everything together, but not muddy it all in so it just becomes one uniform splodge. I used this technique on everything I did that was rusty, whether it was the corridors, trash crams, the works. The only difference was, on the corridors, I tended to use the lighter colours to put on scratches sideways, so I used my brush in a horizontal sort of motion. And I went through all the colours. Doing this, I discovered two things. One, using an enamel wash, a brown one especially, as a base coat sometimes ends up with glossy patches, and I fix that at the end with pigments. Two, when I'm going over these matte prints with absolutely no primer, it works fine, but actually it sometimes needed to be a bit thicker. So where I thinned it too much, the brown showed through. I think it came out all right. I ended up going over them a couple of times and reworking them just to get these large flat areas like the trash compactors right. And I'm left with one beautifully rusty junk pile. But it's a little too homogeneous. It all looks the same, which you don't get in scrap. It's a mix of plastics and metals and various different items. So I used acrylic white, which is ivory actually, pale blue and pale green paint dabbed on with one of my tattiest brushes to select and highlight some different objects. To add a different colourway into the effect, I used a black wash. Now, I'm using up old products. This is a Vallejo black acrylic wash I've had on the shelf for years. And I dabbed it on to make the conveyor belts a bit darker, but I also picked out a number of items in the scrap piles with it neat before diluting it with water, just plain water, and using it as a wash over areas to darken any that looked a little bright with the rust and to knock back all the painted areas. I put it over all the painted areas so they don't look too bright and shiny. I used broadsword silver speed paint to add a dull metal effect as well. Finally, I used tractor pigment, it's a rust-coloured pigment, to tone back down those very black and stark looking conveyor belt pieces. You can put it on and then rub it back off again to get a shiny, worn look if you want. Did that, used it to get rid of any gloss areas where the enamels had pooled and a little too shiny to be believable. Just a quick note, if you're using these to play with, you will definitely want to put matte varnish over them to seal in those pigments, or they'll go everywhere. And we're nearly there. Scrap spiders. These used exactly the same techniques as everything else. So we have rust streaks, crusted rust deposits, white ivory paint, blue and green paint, broadsword silver, blackwash and diluted blackwash. I used polished silver speed paint followed by Tamiya clear gloss red for the eyes. At the same time as I painted the rats, I painted up my scavengers. So these have exactly the same colours as those. So first up, brown priming. A browny beige dry brush, followed by a lighter dry brush of a lighter colour. And finally, the vents. These are the last part of the Kickstarter. They have crawl-through vents with lids if you want them, without if you don't. They come in T-straights, crosses, all the usual stuff. And to paint them, I literally just airbrushed them. I couldn't be bothered to do anything else at this point. So I took my hundreds of vents, because why do small amounts when you can do large amounts? And I used a brownie black. It's a mix of two primers. I didn't even spray it all over. I sprayed it really lightly around the edges of each section inside and out of the vents and left them at that. Then all I had to do was put them together. They literally just slot into each other. They're flexible, so you can put them into curves. They're just really easy to use and put on the table. And here's what it looks like. The Sewer District. Don't forget, you can get this on Kickstarter now. I've really enjoyed it. I hope you can see how well these grungy techniques came out and how easy they were to do. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe, like the video and head on over to Kickstarter.